Long ago, the land of Tamriel was explored and settled by elves from the Summerset Isles. These explorers and colonists had their own reasons for leaving the Summerset Isles, whether out of a lust for adventure, to escape a debt, or perhaps to evade the strict social codes that ruled and continue to rule the home of the High Elves. Among the chief reasons to leave the Summerset Isles was in the pursuit of alternative worship. The High Elves use the term Aedra and daedra to refer to the deities they recognize. Aedra means our ancestors, and includes famous figures like Auriel, Finaster, and Magnus, among others. Daedra means not our ancestors, and you've probably heard the likes of Molag Bal, Sheogorath, or Meridia. The Summerset Isles are run by a government of staunch Aedra worshippers, and they have long outlawed daedra worship. That ban on daedra worship would later create what we now know to be the Ayleids, an offshoot of High Elves that left the Summerset Isles. These Ayleids freely worshipped the daedra, particularly the supposed 10 ancestors, which are 10 hand-picked daedric princes of particular note to the Ayleids. It's important to note that the word Ayleid does not necessarily denote a daedra-worshipping High Elf. There were Ayleids that worshipped the Aedra, like their cousins in the Summerset Isles. Instead, the word Ayleid refers to those High Elves that lived and ruled in Tamriel without obeying the strict social codes of the Summerset Isles. For that, they are also sometimes called Wild Elves. That being said, the Ayleids' role in history is a strongly negative one in the eyes of just about everyone that's ever interacted with them. You see, the Ayleids colonized Cyrodiil, or Ald-Sirod as it was known then, and they created many warring city-states that bickered over what gods to pray, among a million other details in their way of life. What chiefly united the Ayleids, above all, was their enslavement of and disdain for humanity. The men of Cyrodiil, the Sirods, existed in squalor under the Ayleids. Nonetheless, the Ayleids had their own schism, the Narfencel schism, over Aedra and daedra worship. The Daedra Files won, exiling the Aedra-worshipping Ayleids to Black Marsh. Those Ayleids would become known as the Barsaebics. If you think they're the unlucky ones, then you'd be mistaken. When Ysgramor, a legendary Atmoran, conquered Skyrim from the Snow Elves and created an empire of man, this inspired the slaves in Cyrodiil to revolt. They united under Saint Alessia, the slave queen, whose brave warriors Morahouse and Pelinal slaughtered the Ayleid lords. Alessia would, from the ashes of the Ayleid Empire, form the Alessian Empire, which worked to eradicate all elven influence in Cyrodiil. The eradication of the Ayleids in Cyrodiil culminated in the founding of the Ayleid Order, a monotheistic religion that rejected the Aedra and daedra, calling them elven gods. But this video isn't about the Alessians, so let's not dive into that. Instead, let's refocus on those Barsaebic Ayleids that fled to Black Marsh. Now, many thousands of years later, the Barsaebics continue to venerate the Aedra in what little land they can call home in the hostile swamps of Black Marsh. These Barsaebics are not innocent themselves, as their initial invasion of Black Marsh was a violent one. They enslaved the Argonians for a time, but ultimately, their influence remained local to a handful of cities and provinces around northwest Black Marsh. That was a long time ago. Now the Barsaebics have been corralled into just a couple cities where they hide away, just hoping to survive. In the city of Loriasel, an ambitious Barsaebic lady, Marilia Carandol, has come to power, a descendant of an Ayleid Aedra worshipper from Kemen, a city that once sat where Cheydinhal now does. She's a staunch worshipper of the Aedra herself, and she's tired of hiding from the Argonians and Kothringi that surround her realm. Lady Marilia doesn't know it now, but her pursuit of a new Ayleid homeland will set in motion events that will forever change Tamriel. For now though, she's more concerned with the reality of her people's slow descent into extinction. Lady Marilia has spent her first century of life or so far on keeping the very presence of her people and their cities hidden from her enemies. The hidden cities of the Barsaebics have been a necessary precaution to prevent certain doom, but as their zones of influence shrink, there are fewer and fewer places to hide out. On account of that tactic, this Ayleid lord has little to no experience running campaigns of conquest. She's going to have to rely on her powerful magical abilities and her willingness to learn. She took on Cyrodiil as her patron, which isn't necessarily a god as much as it is a constellation said to be imbued with power. Cyrodiil itself is considered a sibling of Meridia, the Daedric Prince of Light, as both are associated with the stars. Regardless, Cyrodiil's domain is that of the element of flesh, its flexibility and adaptability being useful to Merilia's upcoming time of change. In a more down-to-earth, or rather down-to-mundus approach, Marilia also appointed her cousin as the Archmage of the realm, giving her the title of the Black Marsh Marauder. She will train Ayleid mages of Loricel to fight in foreign territory effectively. Finally, Marilia got married to a young Barsaebic strategist that stood out among her ranks, Gordhauer. She will be asking him to advise on all military campaigns in the near future. And so, the two consummated their marriage, rather successfully I should add, and then the fight to secure Ayleid society began. The Kothringi are a strange group of men with silvery skin that have long lived in Black Marsh. They're the easiest targets for Marilia to take down, so she declared war on the tribe of Uxastailul in Hearthfire of 440, her first war. Against the hopelessly outnumbered and underprepared Kothringi, Lady Marilia won an easy victory and then continued her campaign. The other Kothringi, realizing the Ayleids had revealed themselves, attacked. Two tribes from Sur and Hilzeal led an attack on Loriasel. To get the upper hand, Marilia lured the Kothringi into Relace Lore, a dense jungle where her Ayleid sorcerers had the advantage. Seeing the trap far too late, the Kothringi were caught out and defeated. They wouldn't give up easily though, and continued the war. They would suffer further defeats in the jungles of Uxastailul, surrendering in Frostfall of 442. Marilia's husband, Gordhauer, encouraged her to be aggressive and attack the Kothringi before they could recover, so she did. Her men surrounded Hilzeal, slowly breaking its walls down with destruction magic, but the Kothringi aren't the only threat of Black Marsh, and in fact, they are among the least of its worries. The Argonians of Hellstrom declared war while Marilia's army was still in Hilzeal. At the very least, Marilia was able to capture the Kothringi chief once his city fell, and for his life, he paid a tidy sum of gold. Upon conquering Hilzeal though, it turned out that forces from Artimon had already been invading. They attempted to seize the advantage in the chaos, attacking Marilia's army right after they'd taken Hilzeal. They were repelled, but with much difficulty, and now Marilia has to face both the Argonians from the south and these men from the west. The Argonians proved far more slippery than the humans she dealt with so far. She was ready to fight in Arlis, which had terrain advantageous to her, but the Argonians simply retreated. Maybe they're hoping to fight once Marilia has exhausted her forces against the invaders from Artimon. Thankfully, the two-front war became just one front when, in Morningstar 444, Marilia decisively defeated the men of Artimon, extracting a fine war operation from them in the process. She once again tried to catch the Argonians, but they retreated into their marshes. Once again, Gordhauer advised Marilia, explaining that this was an attempt to frustrate her and have her send her men into the marshes, where she'd surely be defeated. Gordhauer, a wise strategist, advised to wait until the Argonians make a mistake, but Marilia, more an accountant than a warlord, was pulling her hair out at the expense of these wars. She can't afford to wait. Going after her husband's advice, she followed the Argonians, but took a wider route, attempting to force them north rather than south. This worked, as the Argonians traveled north up the river until they stopped in the mountains of Chukmont. The enemy had a defensive position in the mountains, but it was preferable to bankrupting the realm chasing them forever. Gordhauer sighed, but accepted his wife's decision. They attacked, and although a painful fight, the Barsaebics emerged victorious. The Argonian, Talon J of Hellstrom, was captured, but allowed to live for a pricey ransom. The Barsaebics are not bankrupt, thank goodness, but war waits for no one. Even at peace, the Kothringi rose up in resistance to their conquerors. Thankfully, these barely organized tribesmen put up little real opposition, instead just costing Marilia her time and money. Lady Marilia spent the next handful of years refining her study of practical magic, as she believed the key to her people's eventual rise would be their attunement to magical forces. Unfortunately for her though, grave news hit the realm when heralds brought word of Atrebus Solsildor's victory over the Akaviria Potentate. It's not a problem that Atrebus won, it's a problem that the war has ended at all. Now the Cyrodiilic people are at least tentatively united, it won't be as easy to fly under the radar and build strength. At the same time, Atrebus likely had little to no interest in invading Black Marsh, at least for a while. He'll have to unite Cyrodiil first, which could take a long time. In Evening Star 448, Marilia took on the title of Arana of Loriasel, a rank similar to that of Petty Queen, or just Queen with sufficient prestige, which was a powerful piece of hope for her people. Titles might just be titles, but pride motivates people to fight, and High Elves, especially the Ayleids, are particularly motivated by their pride. In late 449, Marilia invaded more Kothringi tribes to her north, but while doing that, the very same Talon J of Hellstrom declared war on her again, looking to once again try and sneak in some conquest during the chaos. Marilia quickly ended the war with the Kothringi, but in an almost comical rehash of recent history, the Lords of Artimon were also invading that Kothringi tribe. She's now at war with the same two realms she was just at war with earlier. Deja vu much? Soon after, another war began, as the Lords of Mazatun, a small Argonian tribe even further north, also jumped in on the action. They came with some battle-hardened Dunmer mercenaries, who were truly an opponent to be feared according to Gordhauer. The Lords of Artimon arrived in Hilzeal in First Seed of 451, and Arana Marilia confronted them right away. They outnumbered her, but the fortress at Hilzeal and its hills would give her the advantage she'd need to win according to Gordhauer. The consort steeled himself, ready for battle as usual, serving his people bravely. He was slain at Hilzeal, unfortunately, leaving behind his two children with Marilia and leaving her bereft of military advice. Marillia would mourn him deeply, both for his usefulness to her and for a genuine love she'd been developing for him. At the very least, the late consort was correct that the fortress and its terrain was enough of an advantage to give Marillia a victory. Despite only fighting the Mazatun Argonians briefly, Marillia declared victory against them in Sun's Height at 451, but their Dunmer mercenaries simply joined the Artemon lords in the war instead of disbanding, looking for any excuse to plunder the rich hidden cities of Loriacel. Talon Jay's Hellstrom Argonians continued their slippery tactics, really hoping to bait out Marillia's frustration, but instead, she tired her army out, heading back north to confront the seemingly tiny forces of Dunmer sieging Seoul. They must have had some talented engineers in that mercenary company, as fortresses were falling fast with the Dunmer in tow. While trying to chase down those dark elves and reclaim their sieged fortresses, Talon Jay managed to occupy his war target of Arlis. His patience had paid off, and it was looking like without Gordhauer, Marillia would be overwhelmed. She was out of money and out of good advice. She nonetheless refused to give up. She continued studying conjuration magic while on the warpath, and finally, in last seed at 454, found a technique that she knew could save her. She learned how to summon and bind armies of daedra to fight for her. To her, a daedra is a vile creature, and does not deserve to be treated any better than a tool, so she summoned many hundreds of them to serve as the vanguard for her army. As a devout daedra worshipper, being able to send many daedra to their sure deaths was, in many ways, satisfying for Marillia. After retaking Arlis, she showed the daedric hordes to her people, explaining that she had full control over them, and that although they spit upon the horrible daedra, they could still serve as an invaluable tool in the pursuit of a new Ayleid homeland. Anyone that disagreed was welcome to leave, but no one did. By now, the Barsaebics are a people of pragmatism. These daedra are necessary. Afterwards, Marillia chased off Talon Jay, and then returned to Uxistylul to relieve the fortress there. She had no doubt that Dunmer would soon return. They did indeed retake Seoul shortly after. Marillia chased off Talon Jay once more, sweating more and more as her debts to her soldiers rose. Even the most loyal soldier needed a wage to feed their family, and they would eventually desert the army if their loved ones were to starve. Thankfully, the daedra demand no wages as magically bound servants. Fearing that her empty coffers would spell her doom, Marillia took back Seoul and then offered to Duke Civilio of Artemon a deal. She would hand over her son as a token of peace, and he would compensate her at least a little bit of gold for the cost of the war. He didn't have much gold left himself, and his anxieties over the war were being superseded by the increasing demands of the Dunmer mercenaries. He accepted the offer, paying a paltry sum and taking Marillia's son as a hostage. There was prestige to having an Ayleid hostage, even so many millennia after the end of the Ayleid Empire. With that war over, Marillia surprised Talon Jay at Arlis, as she was able to get there earlier than he expected. She defeated him in a proper battle, capturing a critical artisan of his, Streammerk Iocondus. He was ransomed for a hefty sum, and then the war ended, with victory for Marillia. She was out of the negatives, and put the sums from the war operations into paying her armies. She also offered to them honorific titles in return for a deferment of wages, which some of them took. This left the treasury in a stable position, but from here on, Marillia will try to phase more and more daedra who will fight for free into her army. Peace brought calm to the realm, and Marillia took some time to sit on her humble throne. She'd survived this onslaught, but surely only more challenges will come. In Morningstar 458, Talon Jay sent a letter to Marillia, which she assumed would be another declaration of war, but in reality, it was a rather humorous offer of alliance. As if a proud Ayleid would ever ally with a lowly Argonian, let alone one that was defeated in 2 wars already. Marillia replied to the letter with a yes, but fully intended to abandon Talon Jay at the first sight of war, in the hopes that he'd bite off more than he could chew and get himself another embarrassing defeat. With confidence in herself, an army of daedra to preserve the lives of her subjects, and the martial lessons of her deceased consort Gordhauer, Marillia looked to the stars. The daedra must be watching, and surely they will always support her while she keeps them in her heart. Looking to expand her realm, Marillia continued attacking the Kothringi, who were simply the easiest enemies to defeat. The Queen of Koth was in trouble, her realm being picked apart by Argonians, Imperials, and now also Ayleids. Marillia wouldn't let such an opportunity escape her, of course. After that war, the Koth kingdom collapsed, and upon returning home, Arana Marillia heard news that Aran Sunatwil of Cilianorn had also managed to create a small realm of his own. Aran Sunatwil is a pleasure to see, as a fellow Ayleid can be hard to find. Nonetheless, Marillia couldn't help but consider conquering a potentially weak neighbor. She banished the thought for now, though, worried that she might be attacked by Atrebus if she were locked into too difficult a war. Instead, she took a trip to the arcane university of Cyrodiil, disguising herself as an Alanori high elf, so that she could further use her magical attunement to fight off greater foes. She also used the opportunity to visit many beautiful sites in Cyrodiil, which have now been ravaged by war. One day, this will all be hers, she told herself. While conducting her studies at the Arcane University, Marilia came across a class for Applied Magic in War, where she studied diligently to become a proper battle mage. These were exactly the techniques that she needed, and although she felt weird to be learning from a human the very techniques she'd soon be using to destroy them, it was more important to really take in these lessons than to worry about the irony. After finishing up her studies, she became a better mage, and returned home with a teleportation spell. While she had studied war magic, as explained, she also studied some restoration magic and used it to extend her lifespan beyond its natural end. She did this hoping to prevent herself from aging, as the image of a proud young Ayleid queen would be more motivating to the army than a wrinkled old lady barking orders. Marilia pondered the idea of a new temporary empire, the Empire of Barsaebica, which could exist in Black Marsh as a sort of industrial zone that could provide the resources needed to return to Cyrodiil. Her contemplations were interrupted when, rather suddenly, she received a declaration of war from a queen of Soulrest, Aina of the sanguine-worshipping Yespest men. She exploded onto the political scene in recent time, conquering all of western Black Marsh and even parts of central Black Marsh. She's a worshipper of the Daedric prince Sanguine, and she's a human. Marilia is a hater of the Daedra and an elf. The ultimate rivalry might have just spawned. The only problem is that initial scouting reports show that Queen Aina is perhaps not just Marilia's equal, but even her superior. She has more soldiers, better soldiers, hordes of wealth, and a fearsome reputation. Marilia had been dreaming of her own ascension as the Fen Lady of Barsaebica, and yet she was about to be upstaged by someone that perfectly opposes all her values. Though angry and hoping to destroy this upstart human, the strategic reality is that Marilia should pray to even survive this invasion. Knowing that Queen Aina will likely be busy fighting her many wars, Marilia jumped on the castle at Pantherfang, hoping to put as many castles between her enemies and her capital as possible. She turned east to confront a pitiful scouting force sieging Relay's Lure, and after that small army retreated into their river fleet, Marilia returned west to find an underfed but larger force heading to Seoul. Rather than confront it, she waited for more reinforcements to arrive and ambushed those men before they could meet with the bigger army. They were captured but allowed to live. Marilia then told Queen Aina that if she agreed to a 5-year truce, she'd let the men live. If not, she will very publicly execute these daedra-worshipping scum and tarnish the queen's reputation. Marilia's plan, you see, is to outlive Queen Aina. This queen, after all, is only human. Queen Aina agreed, pulling her army back and reclaiming the prisoners of war. Realizing that the queen will return in 5 years, Marilia went ahead with her conquest of Silionorn, emulating the old bickering of the Ayleids in the past. At least in this case, it was for a good reason. The region of Silionorn was an extremely valuable addition to Loriasel, and Marilia continued the war into some Argonian land at merciful reduction and 10 Marwolk. These new subjects and their additional taxes will pay for yet more Ayleid sorcerers, and as if on cue, Queen Aina declared another invasion of Loriasel in 2nd Seed of 475. This time, Queen Aina had no other wars to distract her, and she'd be arriving with her full force. Marilia feared she'd run out of options, but then she remembered an old foe. Those Dunmer mercenaries and their immense martial expertise. Perhaps they could be her salvation. She hired the Gardoon Company, despite their exorbitant prices, and begged them to arrive as soon as possible. The Dunmer said they'd get there when they can, treating the whole thing a bit too casually for Marilia's liking. The Dunmer won't arrive in time, so Marilia held off on paying them quite yet, instead standing her ground east of Hill Zeal, at the Black Marshes of Malaru, as an army 3 times the size of her own arrived to challenge her. Marilia prepared the ultimate Black Marsh ambush, and then, just as Queen Aina arrived, she cast a spell of Inflict Wounds on her. A spell like that won't knock someone totally out of action, but it was enough of a distraction that for just a few moments in the battle, Queen Aina was not leading her men. Astoundingly, Marilia managed to eke out a victory against the queen, with her army cheering triumphantly. The Dunmer haven't even arrived, and it turned out that they might not be necessary. With the right strategic mind, even seemingly impossible wars can be won. And yet, one battle is not a total victory. Marilia headed down to Hajhutlwheel, holding a bridge that would force Aina into another disadvantageous battle. Things were mixed, with both sides fighting with immense ferocity, but then, Marilia smiled. She just needs to outlive Aina. She called for a parley, speaking to the queen, playing on her doubts. Does she really want to lose another battle? Does she really want to risk the reputational loss of yet another defeat on the battlefield? Why not agree to another 5-year truce? Marilia's silver tongue seemed to be among her best talents, as Queen Aina agreed, although with anger in her eyes. Another white peace, another 5 years of time to hope that Auriga might strike down this human queen. In better news, Atreus' empire collapsed in Morningstar 478. Cyrodiil is in chaos, but Marilia can't take advantage of it while Aina is alive. Merelia continued to build up her realm and her army, reinforcing it with more and more daedra. The realm prospered under Merelia's wise leadership, and it survived even as Queen Aina continued to conquer more and more of Black Marsh. In Evening Star 482, Merelia declared herself both Arana of Loriasel and Silionorn, uniting the two important cities of Barsaebic culture. She's continuing to garner support from her people with these points of pride, and by now, some even say that this land could make a fine new homeland. Others will never settle until they sit in the Imperial City once more and rule over the humans as their slave masters. To celebrate Merelia's ascension as a true Arana, she appointed her new consort, Feluthisamir, to be the Pike Captain, granting him the title of the Yespest Repeller. He will play a pivotal role in the defensive tactics of Merelia's war efforts. About a year later, Queen Aina once again came knocking. This time, the Queen would only accept a victory, and Merelia could tell by the look in her eyes across the battlefield. This is a queen who's experienced far too many shameful embarrassments at the hands of a long-gone Ayleid people. She humbled her wargals, looking only to conquer the southern tip of Loriasel and using the mountains and fens as a natural border. Queen Aina played no games, and Merelia did her best but ultimately was defeated. Nonetheless, this loss of land was inevitable, and if anything, the fact that it was land on the frontier of her kingdom made this war yet another to celebrate. Queen Aina surely doesn't have much time left before her mortal life will end. Merelia held a coronation shortly after the war, founding a daedra-hunting holy order in Nenria, whose entire purpose would be to fight off the Sanguine worshippers. Merelia also promised her people to try and keep the peace for now. While they haven't per se grown tired of war, they want to know that once Queen Aina is gone, no one will dare invade their homes again. Queen Aina was 68 years old as of mid-year 486, and for a human, that's a bit old, but certainly not unprecedented. She'll certainly be losing her edge though, as she grows more and more wrinkles. That would be especially true, as whenever possible, Merelia would secretly cast spells that would wound and wear down the queen. In Evening Star 488, Aina declared herself the High Queen of Argonia, having conquered pretty much everything in the region except some stubborn Argonians and of course Merelia's kingdom. Hoping to show some respect and perhaps get close to Aina, Merelia traveled to her capital in Lulor to attend the coronation. She would enjoy the festivities, but Aina wasn't interested in talking. There'd be no discussion of peace, it seemed, as Queen Aina still believed that she could defeat Merelia. Especially now, with all of Argonia behind her, even Merelia was starting to think that she might not survive another invasion. Before the Ayleid queen could even return home, Aina had already declared war, looking to conquer the whole thing and complete her conquest of Argonia. This time, Merelia would need those Dunmer mercenaries and her daedra hunter holy order. She hired both, paying a huge sum of money to the Dunmer. For a while, she avoided direct conflict with the Yespest invaders, hoping to get the right terrain and the right moment to engage. In a direct fight, even with her Dunmer mercenaries, she'd lose handily. She would also catch out stray armies whenever possible, such as at Zal-Hai-A, where Queen Aina's smaller force was isolated from its larger army. Sadly, Aina was not captured there, but she was forced to retreat, while her sub-commanders led the larger army to their doom. Many thousands were slaughtered by the Dunmer, daedra, and Ayleid force, and while the enemy army reconstitutes, Merelia will have the time necessary to take back the many fortresses that she's lost. In the last seed of 492, she offered a white peace to Queen Aina, as usual, and this was despite the fact that at this point, she likely could have actually won the war, especially with these Dunmer helping her. But she didn't want to get overconfident. After the war ended, Captain Hlaren Arelin of the Dunmer Company demanded his payment for the war, but instead, Aina offered him a blank check favor. She didn't have the kind of money to pay for his services beyond what she initially paid him at the outset of the war. The Dark Elf was upset about it, but he had little choice but to accept. After all, what could be more valuable than a favor from a future Ayleid empress? All the experience from these wars against the many enemies that the Black Marsh summoned up against Merelia has created a set of battle-hardened sorcerers with immense magical talent. The retinue of mages available to Merelia will form the elite core of her army, alongside the larger groups of lesser mages for backup. In front of all the mages will be a wall of pikes, pushing back any warriors attempting to stop the mages from fighting. It should be the ultimate army composition against the many peoples of Tamriel. Things are looking good, but then in Sun's height of 494, Merelia's incompetent chancellor accidentally invalidated the truce with High Queen Aina. 3 months later, she invaded. Taking a defensive position at Loriasel, Merelia summoned more daedra, empowered her mages with their own magical power and morale-boosting illusion magic, and waited for the great battle to begin. She also sent word to the very same Dunmer mercenaries from before that she'd be hiring them again. Why they agreed after she already withheld payment was a mystery, but maybe they were just hoping she'd do the right thing this time. As High Queen Aina approached though, Merelia retreated back to Hill Zeal, hoping that the slightly advantageous terrain there would give her a little better of a chance, while also hoping to bait her enemy's army into sending its forces in batches. Most of all though, for the first time, Merelia donned her armor and picked up a sword. Her forces must see her fight to possibly be inspired enough to do this. It's time to truly use her battle mage experience from the Arcane University for something practical. She did lose this battle, but she put up a strong fight. Afterwards, Merelia retreated towards Silionorn to regroup before heading south to Arx Corinium. The enemy army approached, and battle soon began, but Merelia noticed that High Queen Aina wasn't there. For whatever reason, the High Queen left this battle to her underlings. Merelia didn't know at the time, but it turns out that in the previous battle at Hilzeal, High Queen Aina had been hit by some powerful destruction magic which had rendered her comatose. The chaos of the battle hid that fact from the Ayleid forces. This was a great thing, and would ensure victory for Merelia. The enemy was soundly defeated at Arx Corinium, and Merelia went on the attack, taking some fortresses of her own with the help of the Dunmer Ballistas. While sieging Panther Bridge, Merelia gained the nickname the Enchantress, as many believed that she'd convinced the Dunmer to fight for her despite her non-payment via some kind of illusion magic. Indeed, she'd grown to have a way with people. She was inspiring and regal, but not afraid to get her hands dirty and fight intelligently when she needed to. It's important to note that when I say people, I mean the non-humans. Humans like the Yespists certainly have a negative view of the Ayleids, but especially the Cyrodiilic peoples like the Nibonese and Colovians, they will never see her in a good light on account of her heritage. In Frostfall of 496, the war came to an end, except High Queen Aina wasn't there to personally accept the terms of their white peace. Instead, there was a simple messenger bearing the news that the High Queen was too ill to attend. Finally, mortal fragility had hit the Warlord of Argonia. She died shortly after, leaving Argonia in the hands of an unworthy son. The tyranny of High Queen Aina is over, and now, Merelia has survived the worst of her trials. Merelia declared war on Argonia, looking to reclaim the Duchy of Alten Coromont, which was a piece of land that belonged to her kingdom. The High Kingdom was in total chaos, as the new king was opposed by all the Argonians and Kothringi. He was even opposed by some of the more ambitious Yespest lords of his realm. Argonia will soon meet its end, but Merelia will extract her pound of flesh. Afterwards, she maintained peace for a few years, letting her subjects enjoy the unity of Silionorn. She had promised her people peace, and they would get it. In 2nd Siege of 507, Merelia implemented proper mustering grounds in her army, which would let her expand her force of sorcerers, and she also added a group of ballistas to her forces, which can conduct offensive sieges much more effectively. She's ready to go on a rampage at this point. Merelia declared war, a holy war against the daedra-worshippers of Argonia, to take the entire kingdom of Gideon. Her ballistas and sorcerers made short work of the forts in her way, and then, in Sun's Dawn of 510, she captured the High King, who she considered executing or disrupting, but ultimately, he's a very weak king, so letting him live is probably for the best. She enforced her demands, tripling the size of her kingdom in an instant. She would give out the land in Gideon to Barsaebic vassals and gave her people the order to displace any non-Ayleids in the land, replace them with proper daedra-worshipping elves, she commanded, and create Barsaebica, she added. Sad glitch, by the way, stepping out of the roleplay for a second. When you grant land to a randomly generated character, it doesn't give them their lifespan bonuses. So in theory, I should have a bunch of counts that live effectively forever and who will love me, but instead, they live normal human lifespans. Oh well, not a huge deal. In Frostfall of 511, Merelia started a legend espousing her devotion to the Aedra. It told the story of her near century of hiding and praying to the ancestors until they tested her with the wars against Argonia. Finally, she would be rewarded with this great kingdom, and the Aedra would clear the land of Silionorn so that the Ayleids could make it their new home. She hosted a feast to revel in the tales of their near destruction, and as the brave leader that got them through these hard times, Merelia was celebrated across the realm. While enjoying some drinks, Merelia received a letter from the renowned sapiarchs of Alinor, who wanted to have a meeting with her. As an Ayleid, Merelia has little to no connection to the Summerset Isles, but an invitation to visit her fellow age-worshipping cousins was hard to turn down. She set sail for the Summerset Isles in Sun's Dawn of 517. She made sure to pass through many of the wondrous sights of the Isle before meeting with the sapiarchs. They were ecstatic to hear that she was indeed a follower of the proper Aedra, and they asked her to continue her work to help re-establish elven dominance in Tamriel. To help legitimize her rule, the sapiarchs taught Merelia the Altmeris language, which was deeply important to the High Elves as proof of their descent from the legendary Aldmer elves of an age long forgotten. These Alinori scholars and mages even gave Merelia permission to consecrate her bloodline, poring over their records to find her ancestors. Through some creative interpretations of ancient texts, they traced Merelia's Ayleid line all the way back to Auriga himself. Normally such a claim would be wild and meaningless, but with the sapiarch's support it was confirmed as fact now. Merelia returned home, ready to continue fighting the degenerate sanguine worshippers of Argonia. In particular, she went after the deep ebony mines of Torpal, an island off the coast that is often disputed between lords of Cyrodiil, Black Marsh, and elsewhere. By now, Argonia is so weak and Morelia is so strong that these wars end with little fanfare. Instead, war is kind of just the slow redistribution of land, and the lords of Argonia merely unwanted squatters to be evicted. By a first seed of 524, Barsaebic culture has spread nicely across Silionorn. A once nearly extinct culture has now become a major part of Black Marsh's cultural makeup. By the year 529 of the Second Era, Morelia is on the path to dominating the Black Marsh and perhaps soon Cyrodiil. It hasn't been all that long though, since her people nearly went extinct. A culture of remembrance would sweep across Barsaebic culture, as reenactments of the many battles against the Argonians, Kothringi, Yespest, and everyone else, through little board games or just stories of tactics and debates, became very popular. The role of summoned daedric armies especially was controversial among the Barsaebic Ayleids, but at the same time, it was undeniable that without those daedra, the front lines of these deadly battles would have been their own countrymen. In last seed of 531, Morelia conquered the peninsula of Solrest, which is essentially the primary homeland of the Yespest humans. They will be evicted from the land, and Morelia turned Solrest itself into her own personal domain. After a little more conquest of some border regions a year later, Morelia actually controls all the land she needs to properly found the High Kingdom of Barsaebica. However, she doesn't have the centralized crown authority required to legitimately declare a new High Kingdom. It'll take some time for her to prove the legitimacy of such an idea, so she remains only the Arana of Loriasel, Solrest, and Silionorn. One day though, she will be the Malarana, the High Queen of Barsaebica. In the meantime, Silionorn enjoyed peace for many years. She could invade more of Argonia, but to be frank, those black marshes are of little value to her. Morelia instead spent her time learning more magic, studying ancient tomes and scrolls, and accumulating a bottomless war chest. She went to the Khajiit Academy in Corinthi, study esoteric magics, after which she achieved the status of Supreme Magus and mastered every school of magic out there. Truly, she is unmatched as a wielder of the forces that govern this world. Finally, in Hearthfire of 545, she'd spent enough time at peace. It's time to make some moves into Cyrodiil, the true home of the Ayleids. The kingdom of Leyawiin was an obvious target, which Morelia pursued first. The Queen of Leyawiin is an interesting figure in her own right. She's a woman of Nibonese origin, raised in Valenwood in the ways of the Wood Elves, but she worships the supposed cult of heroes that are popular among the humans of Cyrodiil. The eponymous heroes of the cult are figures like Pelinal Whitestrake and Saint Alessia, both of whom were instrumental in the downfall and eradication of the Ayleids in Cyrodiil. Pelinal especially is famous for his slaughter and utter callousness against the Ayleids, defeating even Umaril the Unfeathered, who was blessed with immortality by the Daedric Prince Meridia. Those heroes are gone now, merely mortals that humanity could only wish for the return of. Morelia continued her invasion of Leyawiin. As she conquered the land, she would revoke any territory held by local Nibonese lords, as she would not tolerate any non-elves in her kingdom. With the conquest of the castle of Leyawiin in the first seed of 554, Morelia now controls all the naval trade in Cyrodiil. While conquering further along the west bank of the river, Morelia received a war declaration from some Dunmer at the border between Morrowind and Black Marsh. They were certainly formidable foes, these Dunmer, but ultimately, Morelia herself has evolved as a warrior and leader. She has nothing to fear from these lesser opponents. She defeated them with relative ease before coming back to Leyawiin. In Sun's Dusk of 560, an enemy that Morelia couldn't just defeat in open battle appeared. The Knahaten flu, a devastating disease, began in Morelia's realm. The plague is deadly to all but the Argonians, and there are spreading fears that the plague could destroy the nascent Barsaebica. The flu ravaged Silionorn for some time, and indeed it spread to all of Tamriel with enough time. It took many of Morelia's children, but she herself was spared its wrath. The more worrying outcome of this plague, though, was the loss of Ayleid population in various places. The Argonians would resettle the ravaged lands left behind by the dead Barsaebics, and became once more the majority population there. No matter, the Barsaebics will rebuild, and life will go on. Morelia did not let the plague's decade-long grip on her realm stop her from continuing the restoration of the Empire. She continued fighting in Cyrodiil even as the plague still lingered. Morelia completed the conquest of Leyawiin soon after, and set her sights on what is now known as the territory of Cis Nibin, which was once the seat of a powerful Ayleid kingdom called Wendelbeck. Unfortunately, the Dunmer of House Hilalu have already begun their invasion into the area. The Dunmer are better organized, richer, stronger, and just in general a far more worthy opponent than the local Cyrodiilic peoples. Despite that, the House Hilalu, in particular, is less war-oriented than, say, the House Redoran or House Indoril, and thus defeating them wasn't too difficult. After a few more conquests into Cyrodiil, Morelia finally had enough authority over Cilianord and the other kingdoms she'd claimed to declare the founding of a new High Kingdom. She created Barsaebica, a homeland for the daedra-worshipping Ayleids that were so unfairly forced into exile ages ago. One can only imagine the seething hatred that the daedrophilic Ayleids would feel to see that they had been wiped out by humans, and that their ultimate rivals have prospered in the wake of that destruction. Barsaebica is a massive high kingdom, and many Barsaebic Ayleids, those with less ambition, were quite happy to call it a home for the foreseeable future. Morelia, though, will not be happy until she sits on a throne in the Imperial City. The march of the Barsaebic war machine is a measured and diligent effort. While it might have been easy to simply sweep across all of Cyrodiil and conquer it within a few years, that would only lead to the future end of the Empire. Malorana Morelia is instead taking the time to integrate each piece of land that she conquers. She will either enslave or expel any non-Ayleids that live in her land to ensure that no rebellion can ever happen at such a scale to possibly threaten her. Nonetheless, the war machine took a break for a proper coronation of the new Malorana. She made a promise to shape the realm, but not in the way that you might think. Normally, shaping the realm would refer to building great works that create a better realm for the common people. Instead, Morelia is planning to build as many slave markets as she can now that she's obtained such immense wealth from her conquests. It's time to put the men and beasts of Barsaebica back in chains. After the coronation, Morelia pursued the land in what the humans call grief. Of course, that land is known as Nenalata to the Ayleids. Nenalata, and its larger kingdom once known as Wendelbeck, was where the daedrophilic Ayleids defeated the Barsaebics and forced them into exile. Wendelbeck, thus, is an important symbol for Morelia's people. The humans here call this land Cis-Niben now, perhaps in the hopes of leaving its Ayleid origin in the past. They can only hope that the Ayleid Empire's rise could be stopped now. Morelia did conquer Nenalata, but didn't move the capital back there yet, feeling that she first wanted to restore the city. Right now, the city once called Nenalata is in ruins and would not make a suitable capital. She went to university in Hellstrom to find some ancient texts about old Ayleid architecture. You see, Morelia has lived far beyond the actual existence of the Ayleid Empire, and she wants to restore the city properly. She needs to know how the Ayleids built their cities and castles to do that right. Hellstrom, thanks to its proximity to Barsaebica, is sure to have some texts on the topic. While on the way to Hellstrom, Morelia noticed that any Argonians or men that she passed by would drop to their knees, sometimes in fear, other times in submission. Perhaps they hoped she'd show mercy. Morelia's reputation as a conqueror was already well solidified to her, but as word in Tamriel spreads, it's become a common belief that Morelia will soon unite not just Cyrodiil, but perhaps all of Tamriel. To conquer, and to rule, these are second nature to a noble Ayleid. Conqueror? Morelia doesn't need anyone's belief in her to be a conqueror. She doesn't plan to conquer all of Tamriel, but if it should suit her, then perhaps she will. Ambitions aside, Morelia studied Ayleid architecture well at Hellstrom. She had the whole institution to herself as the entire population of the university evacuated upon hearing that she was coming. Once she's drafted the plans for the city, she'll begin the great construction there. For now, Morelia resumed her invasion of Cyrodiil. She took Reviled in mid-year 595, with human opposition increasing as she approached the Heartlands, but continuing to be inadequate. A few months after conquering Reviled, Morelia finally implemented her plans for Nenalata. She moved the capital there, wishing her Barsaebic subjects all the best while moving out. Nenalata's proximity to the warfront will make war easier to conduct, and will mark a new era of Barsaebica. Where in the past the Barsaebics were the minority, the refugees and the downtrodden of the Ayleid legacy, they are now the restorers and the dominant force. In fact, Morelia fully intends to make of any daedra worshippers that she finds refugees themselves. While excavating Nenalata's ruins further, many Daedric artifacts were uncovered, and from the way the lost city sat, it was clear that it was once a den of Daedric worship. In particular, Meridia was the patron of this city, it seems. Now Nenalata will be transformed into a city for the Daedra. Shortly after, a scholar of Ayleid civilization from the Summerset Isles came to visit. He brought with him the crown of this lost kingdom. It was once worn by the illustrious kings of Wendelbeck. Such an artifact would make for a fine crown, and after verifying its true historicity, Morelia purchased it from the scholar. When she put it on, though, something happened that her court did not understand. For a brief moment, Morelia fell unconscious. This was because locked within the crown was the spirit of an ancient lich, Lineage Horror. Whoever this creature once was, he's a horrible daedra worshipper very clearly, and so Morelia resisted this lich's attempt at controlling her. She defeated the ancient spirit, and remained herself. I reloaded the game to see what happens if you let the lich possess you, by the way, and it essentially overwrites your character's personality and makes you possessed. I don't know if more happens if you continue the game afterwards, but I didn't, so I can't say for sure. What this experience with the Lich made Morelia think about was the culture of the old Ayleids, the Wild Elves, the Saliace, as they are sometimes known. Could the Saliace, as a people, be restored through what records of them could be recovered from Nenalata and other ruins? Wouldn't Morelia surely go down in history as the greatest Ayleid ever to live if she could restore the Empire not just in borders and in moral fabric, but also in its way of life and culture? The ancient rites of flesh-smithing and the competitive spirit of the ancient Saliace would certainly be welcome in this world. After completing a legend detailing Morelia's connection to the daedra, which she earned the right to claim via the Sapiarchs of Alinor, she began work on a great palace in the countryside of Nenalata. Specifically at Moraheim did she build her great palace, which would act as her summer home when, in the future, she rules from the imperial city. Nenalata's restoration has gone quite well, and Morelia continues to enjoy the overwhelming support of her people. What she did not like was reports from back in Barsaebica that raiders from Argonia had started attacking Barsaebic settlements, believing they could get away with it because Morelia moved the capital. The Yespest of Argonia claimed to be on equal standing with Morelia as fellow high kings and queens. That obviously cannot stand. There is only one crown worthy of any veneration, and that's the crown of Nenalata, which sits on Morelia's head. Argonia is nothing more than a backwater, and yet its existence implies that there does exist an equal to Barsaebica. Morelia decided to invade Argonia in Sun's Dusk of 608 to seize their land and eradicate the daedra-worshippers there too. Of course, the only reason Argonia had been allowed to exist was mere disinterest, and so the conquest of this land was a short, simple affair. Black Marsh is normally protected by its geography, but the swamps and bogs of this land are as much a home to Morelia and her people as it is to the Argonians. The High Kingdom of Argonia fell in Morningstar of 612, but many Yespest holdouts continue to rule as nominal vassals of Barsaebica. The daedra hunters will find them, and slowly uproot them as time goes on. The realm refocused on the conquest of Cyrodiil, and as the war continued on, Morelia wondered if even her magically extended lifespan would be enough time to achieve her dreams. Probably, but just in case, she used her overwhelming magical abilities and mastery over all schools of magic known to Tamriel to make herself a true immortal. Maybe it was the influence of that lich that failed to possess her, but Morelia just can't imagine an Ayleid empire ruled by anyone but her. She obtained her immortality at a young enough age that she still appears to be a pretty young woman, and as such, rumors of her being some kind of sadistic vampire would spread throughout the human world. She would never consort with the likes of Molag Bal or any daedra that would curse her with such a thing though. Speaking of immortality, Morelia, it turns out, was not the only immortal in Tamriel. As she continued her conquest, she became aware of the family that occupied her birthright. The Ayleid city of Kemen, now known as Cheydinhal, has become the personal domain of one Humilio Tharn. Humilio is an outed worshipper of Vermina, the Lady of Nightmares. Humilio is pretty much a perfect opposite to Morelia in all ways but arcane talent. It was only natural that Morelia would take a special interest in the destruction of this abhorrent creature. There's nothing more offensive than a human living far past its expiration date, except perhaps a daedra-worshipping human living that long. For the first time, Morelia used her masterful knowledge of alteration magic to cast a spell she'd never used before. When seeing Humilio on the battlefield, she pointed a finger out and absorbed his knowledge of warfare. Where previously, Humilio was a somewhat capable commander of men, he suddenly forgot everything he ever knew of the topic, leaving his army in immense danger. Meanwhile, Morelia had suddenly acquired intimate knowledge of exactly how the Nibonese warriors of Humilio's army fight. That's a very powerful tool, Morelia thought, as she considered what she could learn if she could steal knowledge from the Dark Elves. With Humilio's ability to fight completely destroyed, Cheydinhal fell within just over a year, and Morelia immediately got to cleansing Vermina from this land. The Daedric Prince tried sending nightmares to Morelia's dreams, but with the casting of a simple calm spell, she could turn even the worst Daedric nightmares into pleasant dreams. Although Morelia wanted to govern Cheydinhal, now Kemen, for herself, as it was her birthright, she has more important lands to call her own, so she instead granted the land to her great-great-grandson Tsunabe. If it's her birthright, it's his too, eventually. So long as Cheydinhal remains in the hands of a member of her family, then all will be right as far as she's concerned. After a few more minor wars for some land in Bruma, Morelia was ready to march on the imperial city. She declared war on the half-orc king of Cyrodiil, Ilav, a descendant of Atrebus, I should add, and she intended to take over the entire island. The fortifications around the White Gold Tower were strong, but by now Morelia's powerful magics would easily sunder it. Her forces entered the tower in Morningstar of 629, being careful not to sack it. This is the Temple of the Ancestors after all, and it must be kept intact for when Morelia moves in. The war came to an end just 2 months later, as Malorana Morelia celebrated her great triumph. The Temple of the Ancestors is back in the hands of its proper owners. Nonetheless, To restore the Imperatum Saliace, or the Ayleid Empire in a more modern parlance, she'll need more than just the imperial city. There was little to say about all the wars that soon erupted across Colovia, except that the might of the Ayleids put to shame any attempts at resistance. Cyrodiil has often known foreign conquerors like the Akaviri, the Nords, and long ago even the Ayleids, yes, but these stories often talk about the triumph of a great commander against difficult odds. In this case, the chronicles will be quite boring. Marilia so casually and easily defeats everyone she comes across that in a way, it's boring. That being said, there's nothing boring about genuinely restoring her people to their greatness. Not just in between battles and conquests, but in fact, during them, Marilia spent her time reading about the Saliace and the ways of the ancient empire. She's preparing for the great cultural revival of the Ayleids. She had to tolerate the often elevated status of the daedra in these readings, but she assured her people and herself that she will only revive the parts of the Saliace culture that are not infested with daedraphilic propaganda. By Evening Star of 656, Marilia had enough control over the Imperial Isle to declare the Heartlands truly hers, and now she's looking to restore the Ayleid Empire proper. I should note that the decision to do this in-game is still called Reform the Cyrodiilic Empire, but rest assured, this will not be a Cyrodiilic Empire in any form except its location. There's one complication to this though. Of the 6 requirements, of which 5 must be met, 2 of them are seemingly impossible. In order to restore the bastion at Abagarlis, Marilia needs a large collection of armored legionaries available to the local men and the Akaviri people. She could do that, or she could possibly convert to a Cyrodiilic faith, but of course she would never do that, so how could she possibly restore the Empire now? Well, luckily, there are ways to acquire a collection of legionaries, it'll just take some trickery. She'll worry about that later though, as for now she still needs more control over Cyrodiil. In 664, after a few wars with the Dunmer of House Redorn and Indoril, neither of which were particularly able to resist her, Marilia had settled the imperial city with Barsaebic people. It took a long time to supplant the local population, but with that done, she was able to found many schools and academies which would teach the Barsaebic Ayleids the ways of the old Saliace people. Even Marilia herself embraced the Saliace culture, as she moved the capital to the Temple of the Ancestors and took on the old Ayleid way of life. In terms of the differences between it and Barsaebic culture, it's really more of a mentality thing. The Barsaebics have learned over the millennia of their exile to hide away and survive. They adapted to the Black Marsh and its hostilities. The Saliace, though, are a prideful people. They fight each other and love making other people fight for their own entertainment. The Saliace never hide, their pride far too great to make such an idea reasonable. Marilia has already been living like a Saliace really, but now she'll work to spread the culture throughout the rest of Cyrodiil. She also renamed the Malarancel of Nibenu to the Ayleid Empire, and made it her primary title. Barsaebica is still deeply important to her of course, but it's a land which could be considered perhaps a primary province of the greater empire instead. Anyway, let's talk about how to get some legionaries despite not having the right culture for it. If a vassal dies without an heir, their liege usually gets their gold, land, and most importantly in this case, their men-at-arms. Although it pains me to do so, I created a Colovian ruler out in Fort Coldcorn, Baroness Rue, who I'm hoping will have no kids anytime soon, and who will at some point create some legionaries. The AI is very likely to make units that are special to its culture, so we should see her make some eventually. Once she's done so, I can murder her or imprison her or whatever, and then inherit her legionaries for myself, so long as I have at least one man-at-arms slot open. Once I have a set of them, I can increase their size even without the appropriate culture. While waiting for that to pan out, the conquests of Cyrodiil continued. By Rain's hand of 669, while Marilia was on the tour of her realm, the Baroness had indeed created a group of legionaries. She was assassinated in First Seed the following year, and although Marilia was caught, she didn't really care. She has inherited the legionaries, however she can only make 600 of them at most. She needs 1,000. Well, another delay it shall be then, as she researches the appropriate technology to be able to further expand her force of legionaries. A vanguard acclaimed knight would also work, but she has none unfortunately. In mid-year of 679, Marilia's invasion reached a little region called Narfensel, which was where the Narfensel Schism first took place. It was from a meeting of daedraphile Ayleids at this location that it was decided to send the Barsaebics into exile. By now, it's just another forest, but it had significant importance to the daedra-worshipping Ayleids that now dominate this land. The Narfensel Schism has been resolved for good now, this time in favor of the Daedra. In Sun's height of 686, Marilia's empire has grown immensely, and she rules enough of Cyrodiil to become its emperor for sure, however she needs to wait for those damn legionaries to grow. In the meantime, she added the quarrelsome cultural tradition to the Saliace culture, emphasizing the competitive spirit of the ancient Ayleids. Will this perhaps cause some chaos? Yes, but from the ashes of those defeated and weak Ayleids, might there rise greater ones in their place. By this point, Marilia tires of these boring conquests, so she's actually enjoying a little bit of peace. Her realm could use it anyway. Although her vassals love her, some people are starting to miss seeing their families again. Marilia had just one last project for her army before she'd more or less settle in and wait until the armored legionaries expanded enough to declare her a proper empress. Humilio Tharn, the disgraced lord of Cheydinhal, he still rules a small piece of land off in Eastwatch. Rather than let this human speck of an immortal continue to exist in her border, Marilia declared a war to eradicate House Tharn. The only reason the Tharns had existed this long was that Marilia was disinterested in them, but she felt the need to eradicate a fellow immortal lest he one day build up some power. The war ended in less than 2 months as Marilia captured Tharn in the battle, her tens of thousands of Ayleids easily defeating his 800 men. Humilio Tharn and all his remaining family were executed, and their tiny fiefdom added to the empire. Humilio's death will remind every human of their fate should they ever aspire to anything greater than a slave of the Ayleid lords. Finally, in mid-year of 692, Marilia reformed the Imperial Legion thanks to her inherited legionaries, and with that, she could reform the empire. She changed her house name to Celiace to reflect this empire's identity as the Imperatum Celiace, a true continuation of the ancient Ayleid Empire. Now she has her eyes set on going even further beyond her ancestors. Why settle for just some of Tamriel? The Imperatum Celiace is grand in size and scope, yes, but this world of Mundus is not deserving of the freedoms so hastily granted to it by the likes of the missing god Lorcan. El Epen Morilia of the new Celiace Empire declared to all in Tamriel that she would soon be at their doorsteps, and that if they wish to make some preparations, they will only be delaying the inevitable. She did not claim the mantle of Emperor Riemann, but instead she claimed the power of all the Daedra, proclaiming her intention to enact upon Tamriel the righteous fury of her holy ancestors. This she declared in the year 700 of the Second Era. In less than a century, she would achieve this goal. To expedite the rule of her subjects and assure that Ayleid society follows the Daedra closely, Marilia founded a new faith which was only marginally different from her original faith. Ayleid worship is, in essence, a form of daedra worship that encourages servitude for those who are weak and the further pursuit of power for those in charge. It encourages the lesser peoples of the empire to look to the daedra for mercy, in the hopes that their meaningless toil can serve greater aims that they can't understand, and to never challenge their overlords, for they are above them for the simple reason of their inherent supremacy. Beyond the spiritual reasons to remain subservient, any signs of sedition are clearly found out by the many daedra hunters that patrol every city, and those who are accused of such crimes will find themselves the targets of the beautiful art of Ayleid flesh sculpting. Of course, to claim the title of Empress of Tamriel, Marilia will need control over more than just Black Marsh and Cyrodiil. She set her sights on Hammerfell for a very simple reason. She was intrigued by the rise of a figure known as Mannimarco. This degenerate Alinori lich has led a cult of necromancers for centuries, but now he's actually managed to create a relatively large kingdom in the sands of Hammerfell. Fighting him sounds like a bit of fun, and it would also be a pleasure to cleanse the world of this necromantic filth. So look, let me be real with you here. Uniting Tamriel is a long process, and usually by the time you're actually pursuing it, you're so powerful that no one can stop you. This is exactly my position here, as Marilia has extremely high stats, the Conqueror trait, an advanced culture, and a set of long-lived vassals who all love her. Mannimarco, despite being a fellow immortal and being an interesting figure in the lore of the Elder Scrolls, is just kind of another of many pushovers throughout this conquest of Tamriel. In terms of my strategy to speed things up a bit here, I'm using Holy Wars for Kingdoms against Mannimarco, since he's evil to me. In Elder Kings, Holy Wars can only be used against evil faiths, not hostile ones, unless you have a particular faith doctrine that allows Holy Wars against hostile faiths. I only get one Kingdom Holy War, but I can use Holy Legend seeds to get another one. It takes 5 years to finish a legend at minimum, and a truce is also about 5 years long. So essentially, I can continuously go to war with Mannimarco, taking a kingdom at a time, until I have enough land to create Hammerfell, at which point I can use the De Jure CB to take all his land. An additional bonus to using this Holy Legend strategy is that I'll be converting most of Tamriel to my new faith very quickly, since alongside reasserting the Holy Mission, I can also evangelize the faith with every legend I complete. That will reduce how many populist factions pop up, and just be cool for the RP of course. To give you an idea of how quickly the wars finish, I occupy counties in just a handful of days, and I have a larger and higher quality army than anyone else in Tamriel, maybe even combined. That could be pushing it though. Wars just kind of end before I can even think about them. While waiting for the truce with Mannimarco to wear off, I'm using a Duchy Conquest CB to invade the Crown Republic. Obviously, duchy conquest is slow, but Elder Kings introduces two very cool innovations. In the third technology era, there's an innovation that unlocks kingdom tier conquests for high fame characters, and in the fourth era, there's another that unlocks empire tier conquests for max fame characters. I can't get that fourth era tech yet, but the third era one I certainly can, and once I have it, conquering enemies that are merely hostile will be much easier. In terms of the roleplay here, you have likely already noticed that I've stepped out of the character's lens by this point, and that's because there's not really much to the motivation behind these wars besides a combination of the diligent and zealous trait. For Morelia, this is her mission, and although war is menial by this point, it must be done. Every once in a while I go through my prisoners and just hit execute on all of them, and in my mind that's Morelia doing mass sacrifices to the daedra, and of course punishing the weak, as is righteous in her faith. After many holy wars and conquests in Hammerfell, the entire province was conquered in Sun's Height of 755. Now that Morelia controls Cyrodiil and 2 additional provinces of Tamriel, she can restore the empire. Funnily enough, despite being an Ayleid, I can rename the empire after Saint Alessia, who led a rebellion that destroyed the Ayleids. Naturally, I will not be doing that. We will instead be calling it the Saliace Empire, but this empire will go by many names depending on who you talk to. Among the Cyrodiilic humans, it will be the Slaver Empire, a cursed elven resurgence that oppresses them far more than ever before. Among the Argonians, who have long since adopted daedra worship by this point, and surely accepted their lower place in the empire, some might view Morelia as a manifestation of the Hist, others might view her as Sithis itself, yet more Argonians might pray to Sithis and the Histories in defiance of the empire. They will be dealt with by the daedra hunters. Indeed, in Morelia's new world, pretty much anything that isn't the exact worship of the daedra in the exact way that she believes is right, is the influence of the daedra. Anyway, the next province to fall to the Ayleids was Valenwood. Once you form the Empire of Tamriel, which I've renamed to the Ayleid Empire by the way, you can invade any Empire tier territory, albeit this CB tends to create a lot of vassals which can rebel. Thankfully, my army is so huge that factions only ever very rarely achieve a large enough size to be a threat. After Valenwood came Skyrim, which remains divided to this day. That means there will be 2 provinces of Skyrim, each one to be ruled by a member of Morelia's family. It was quite simple to invade Morrowind afterwards, although the huge number of tribunal temple counties means that there are actually enough of them to form a faction that can fire. At one point, later on in the game, I'd end up having a couple simultaneous populist revolts that had a chance at winning only because I was too lazy to split my army up to fight all 3 at once. We'll look at that later as it comes. Well, I forgot to mention it of course, but between Skyrim and Morrowind, I did grab the Summerset Isles. It was the easiest to conquer because of course there's only one huge united realm there. It's easier to win just one war quickly than to have to fight a bunch of tiny realms like in Skyrim. The invasion of Morrowind began with the conquest of the houses Indoril and Halalu, as well as the conquest of the Tribunal Temple itself. Afterwards, the Redorans and Telvannis fell, which left only the Ashlanders, who were divided in 2. They were the easiest of all to conquer. All of this conquest took a brief break when Morelia held a great sacrifice of all her prisoners so far at the Temple of the Ancestors. I forgot to mark people as chosen sacrifices though, so it kinda just did nothing. Oh well, the execute all button works just as well anyway. I went after High Rock next, invading Daggerfall, which is occupied by the remnants of the Crown Republic. Before finishing up the conquest of High Rock, I went after Elsewhere, which, like Skyrim, was divided. That means 2 rulers in Elsewhere. While invading the Khajiit homeland, I also plotted to assassinate Matamarco for no real reason beyond the fact that I could. I'm sure he'll just reform himself given he's a lich and all that, but at least according to the game, he's dead for good as of 2nd Seed of 781. That rebellion I mentioned earlier happened in 782 by the way. The Alinori High Elves, who still believed in the system of Praxis, rebelled alongside the Nords and the Tribunal Temple followers. These 3 are huge groups, and so putting them down all at once is a bit difficult. It's not that their armies stand a chance, it's that there are so many of them, and they can occupy a lot of counties faster than you might expect. The best way to handle this would be to split the army up and send the appropriately sized response to each of the rebels, but that just takes so much micro. I focused on one rebellion at a time, but eventually got scared by how high the war score was getting, so I ended up hiring a ton of mercenaries with my effectively infinite cash, and just threw the mercenaries at the problem. This works great, because you can summon mercenaries instantly, and in any spot you want, so I can doom drop 20,000 mercenaries right next to a rebel stack and wipe it almost instantly, then disband those mercenaries and re-raise them anywhere else in Tamriel in 0 days. Is that an exploit? I don't know, maybe. Regardless, I used it to make the conquest of Tamriel a bit more tolerable gameplay-wise. Anyway, I finished the conquest of all but a couple counties and Elsewhere. I was held back by some truces, so I went to go finish the conquest in High Rock. I believed I had conquered all of it, but upon checking if I owned all the land in the province, I saw that I didn't have the option to incorporate it into the empire. I was missing something. It was the Island of Greyhome, ruled by some Redguard vampire pirates or something. I'm sure the story behind that is very cool, but they need to be destroyed so Tamriel can be won. The time it took to conquer High Rock ran out the clock on my truces for the last 2 counties and elsewhere, so I went to finish off that province's conquest, and with that, united Tamriel. The Third Era began in Rain's Hand of the year 790, marking the end of the Second Era's interregnum. Tamriel is united under an immortal Ayleid who has eradicated not just daedra worship, but in fact all worship of anything but the Great Daedra. I could keep playing and continue spreading this Aliache culture, which by now has already spawned some new divergences itself, and I could even go for a full 150 using my unending Holy Legend seeds, but I just don't see much of the point of that. The final thing I did in this run was build a ton of slave markets, because, you know, that's kind of the whole thing of the Ayleids. I like to think that this empire is a weird sort of inverse of the ancient Ayleid Empire. Those Ayleids worshipped the daedra and enacted their cruelty openly, but this Ayleid Empire worships only the daedra, who are nominally morally good gods in most interpretations, and yet, that moral goodness has been transformed into supremacy, with Morelia's faith creating a mythology that places the Ayleids above even the other High Elves of Valinor. The daedra have given the Ayleids Tamriel, and through their contempt of the weak, the Ayleids have claimed their birthright. My apologies for more or less trivializing the total conquest of all of Tamriel, but by the time I'd conquered Cyrodiil, and probably even before that, there was just no stakes to the game anymore. The only reason I actually bothered to finish up the conquest was because Morelia's zealous and diligent traits made it feel obligatory. How could someone with that mindset not complete the empire? One day, Morelia might give up her throne. She's immortal and pretty much untouchable as a total master of magic and rulership. Nonetheless, some crazy human might one day catch her off guard, and maybe this empire could dissolve. Maybe one day another human saint will lead a slave rebellion against Morelia and actually win with the help of a Cesarine like Pelinal Whitestrake. Surely though, that will not happen for a very long time. The Ayleids are back, and they're here to stay. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want more like it, check out a video I did on the Alakir a little while ago. That one doesn't have any immortals in it, if the traditional family politics CK3 is more your thing. Thank you for your time.